I see water, I see sand, I see vegetation. All of this will be destroyed by climate change.
On a night in August 2017, in the icy waters of the Baltic Sea, a homemade submarine glided silently beneath the surface. Inside it, one of Scandinavia's most talented journalists was about to discover that she had embarked on her final report. Kim Wall was only 30 years old, yet she had already documented conflicts in some of the world's most dangerous places. She had infiltrated North Korea, explored the torture chambers of African dictators, and investigated voodoo rituals in Haiti. Ironically, it would be on a calm summer afternoon in Copenhagen, just a few kilometers from her native Sweden, that she would meet her end. The man who killed her was not a soldier, a dictator, or an ordinary criminal. He was Peter Madsen, a Danish inventor celebrated by the local media, affectionately known as Rocket Madsen. To the public, he was a brilliant eccentric who built submarines and dreamed of launching people into space. To Kim Wall, he would be her murderer. This is a case that shocked not only Denmark, but the entire world. A crime that seemed designed to be perfect, committed by a man who believed he had found the ideal way to make a person disappear forever into the depths of the sea. But Peter Madsen underestimated one crucial factor: the power of modern forensic science. DNA analysis, digital forensics, message reconstruction, detailed autopsies, and even documentary footage became the tools that exposed one of the most calculating killers in Scandinavian criminal history. This is the story of how technology uncovered the death submarine. If you are interested in true crime cases and want to understand how modern forensic science solves the most complex crimes, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single detail of this extraordinary investigation.
Hi, my name is Kim Wall. Currently in the middle of the Pacific on the Lady E, a Marshallese government supply ship, on my way back from Anueta Castle, where I've been reporting on the nuclear waste site threatened by climate change. This is exactly the kind of stories I like to do, where I can combine on the ground, shoot letter reporting with the foreign policy lens, hopefully carve out a space for myself in the male-dominated world that is foreign policy. Thank you.
Kim Isabel Frederico Wall was born on March 23, 1987, in the small coastal town of Trelleborg in Sweden's Scania region. From an early age, Kim displayed an insatiable curiosity about the world around her. She grew up in a family that valued education and knowledge, and it quickly became clear that she had inherited not only intelligence, but also a courage few possessed. Her academic journey was impressive. She studied international relations at the prestigious London School of Economics, graduating with distinction in 2011. But Kim wasn't content with just one degree. She wanted more. She wanted to understand the world in all its complexity. She spent time at the Sorbonne in Paris and later moved to New York, where she earned a dual master's degree in journalism and international affairs from Columbia University. What truly set Kim Wall apart from other journalists was not only her exceptional academic background, her willingness to go where others dared not venture. While many reporters were satisfied covering local events or working in safe newsrooms, Kim sought the most challenging stories in the most dangerous places. Her reporting became legendary among colleagues. In 2014, she managed to infiltrate North Korea, one of the most closed-off countries in the world, without official government permission. The resulting story revealed rarely seen aspects of life under Kim Jong-un's dictatorship. In Uganda, Kim courageously explored the former torture chambers of the brutal dictator Idi Amin, documenting horrors that had occurred decades earlier. In Haiti, Kim delved deeply into voodoo culture, not as a tourist seeking exotic experiences, but as a serious journalist trying to understand the social and religious complexities of one of the Western Hemisphere's poorest nations. Her work for outlets such as The Guardian, The New York Times, and Time magazine was always meticulously researched and written with a rare sensitivity. In 2016, Kim received the Hans Mead Award for Best Digital Reporting for her series on the Marshall Islands and the devastating effects of U.S. nuclear testing in the region. The reporting highlighted how local communities continued to suffer from radiation decades after the tests, an issue few journalists had taken the time to investigate properly. But Kim Wall was not just an exceptional journalist, she was also a passionate woman. In Copenhagen, she had found love with Ole Stobbe Nielsen, a talented Danish designer. Their relationship was strong, full of plans for the future. In the summer of 2017, they decided to embark on a new adventure, moving to Beijing, China. The decision to move was not impulsive. Kim had spent months planning, studying Mandarin, and establishing contacts. She saw China as the next major story of her career, a country in transformation, offering endless possibilities for important reporting. Ole, always supportive of her dreams, agreed to accompany her. To celebrate this new chapter, the couple organized a farewell party on the evening of August 10, 2017. It was to be an intimate gathering with close friends at the Refshaleøen Harbor in Copenhagen. Everyone was excited to wish them luck on their Asian adventure. Kim had spent the first months of 2017 finishing her European reports before the move. Among the stories she planned to cover was a profile of Peter Madsen, the eccentric Danish inventor who had gained local fame for building homemade submarines and developing ambitious space projects. Since the beginning of the year, Kim had tried to contact Madsen for an interview. She had heard about him through other journalists and was intrigued by his story. A man building functional submarines in makeshift workshops and dreaming of sending people into space with homemade rockets certainly had a story worth telling. Initially, Madsen was evasive. He responded to Kim's emails irregularly, sometimes showing interest, other times disappearing for weeks. For a journalist accustomed to difficult sources, this was not unusual. Kim persisted, maintaining polite but firm contact. She knew that good stories required patience. What Kim didn't know was that to Peter Madsen, Kim Wall had become more than just a journalist seeking a story. Deep in the disturbed recesses of the disturbed inventor's mind, Kim Wall had become something far more sinister: a target. On the afternoon of August 10th, as Kim prepared for her farewell party, she received a text message that would change everything. It was from Peter Madsen. After months of attempts, he was finally ready for the interview. More than that, he invited her to a unique experience, to see his submarine from the inside and take a short trip through the waters of Copenhagen. For Kim, who had faced far greater dangers in far more perilous places, a submarine ride in the calm Danish waters seemed almost relaxing. It was the perfect opportunity to complete her final major report before moving to China. Little could she imagine that she was about to embark on her last story.
There is the possibility that you've simply come upon a human predator. And I wouldn't know. Because do the psychopaths know that he's a psychopath? I'm not sure.
Peter Langier Madsen was born on January 12, 1971, in Sæby, Denmark. His childhood was marked by abandonment and emotional instability, factors that decades later forensic psychologists would attempt to link to the monster he would become. His father, Carl Madsen, was more than 30 years older than his mother, Annie. Carl had served as a carpenter during World War II and was known to be a difficult and violent man, especially toward the 3 stepchildren Annie brought from previous relationships. When Peter was just 6 years old, Annie could no longer endure the situation and fled, taking all the children with her. A few years later, Peter made a choice that would shape his personality forever. He returned to live with his father. Perhaps it was the lack of stable male figures, or a genuine fascination with the engineering world Carl represented. The fact remains that father and son shared an obsessive passion: rockets. In Carl's makeshift workshop, Peter spent his adolescence learning about fuels, propulsion, and mechanics. His first major project came at age 15, when he forged a membership card for the Danish Space Agency, a precocious sign of his willingness to lie when convenient. In 1986, at 15, Peter built and launched his first large rocket, 1 meter tall and modeled after the American MX Peacekeeper missile. The rocket rose 100 meters before crashing violently to the ground. To Peter, it was a success. To the neighbors, it was the first sign that the boy could be dangerous. The death of his father in 1990, when Peter was 19, left him entirely unmoored in the world. Without family supervision and with a personality already shaped by years of emotional instability, Peter threw himself headlong into increasingly ambitious projects. He joined DARK, Dansk Amateur Rocket Club, Copenhagen's amateur rocket club, but soon became persona non grata. Other members complained about his arrogance and tendency to exaggerate his achievements. One former member joked that saying his name would trigger the sprinkler system, a nod to the frequent explosions his projects caused. Peter never completed formal higher education, but he took courses in welding and basic engineering. He compensated for the lack of academic credentials with an impressive ability to persuade people and organizations to fund his projects. His public charisma was undeniable. He knew how to sell his dreams. In 2002, Peter completed his first submarine, the UC-1 Freya. Built over a year, the submarine was functional, though primitive. He used it for several years before deliberately sinking it to create an artificial reef, a pattern that would later occur in far more sinister ways. But it was the UC-3 Nautilus, launched in 2008, that made Peter Madsen famous. Built over 3 years with a budget of roughly 200,000 euros, the Nautilus was impressive. At 18 meters long and capable of carrying 3 people, it was the largest private submarine in the world at the time. The Danish media adored Peter Madsen. He was Rocket Madsen, the eccentric inventor who embodied Danish innovation. TV shows regularly invited him, newspapers profiled him, and children saw him as a kind of science hero. In 2008, Peter co-founded Copenhagen Suborbitals with Christian von Bengtsen. Their goal was ambitious: to develop rockets capable of carrying humans into space. By Danish standards, this was extraordinary. They achieved several impressive milestones, including successful experimental rocket launches. But behind the public facade of genius, Peter Madsen hid a deeply disturbed personality. Close colleagues began noticing strange behaviors. He often spoke casually about violence. His jokes about death and torture were uncomfortable. He seemed fascinated by suffering. Peter married in 2011 in a simple ceremony at Copenhagen City Hall. His wife worked in the film industry and assisted him in his workshop. But even she began to feel uneasy about aspects of her husband's personality. Peter claimed to live in an open relationship, which many interpreted as a cover for questionable sexual escapades. According to later reporting by Wired, Peter was a regular attendee of fetish parties in Copenhagen. He did not hide his violent sexual fantasies, speaking openly about desires for domination and control. To many who knew him personally, these did not seem like harmless fantasies. In 2014, Peter left Copenhagen Suborbitals after disagreements with von Bengtsen and other colleagues. He founded his own company, the Rocket Madsen Space Lab, but the projects never took off in the same way. Funding became harder to secure, and Peter began showing increasing signs of instability. What the Danish public did not know was that Peter Madsen had been planning something very different from rockets and submarines. On his personal computer, he collected a dark archive, videos of women being tortured, raped, and murdered. These were not fictional films, but real records of extreme violence. Peter had also started writing a disturbing blog in which he openly fantasized about killing women. In posts titled Heaven and Hell, he wrote things like, "If you're angry with your boss, stab her in the back. Why hesitate? She won't be missed by anyone." For other women he knew, Peter sent joking messages about his murder plans. He spoke about tying women up in his submarine and killing them. Most interpreted this as dark humor from an eccentric man. In reality, these were premeditated confessions. By early 2017, when Kim Wall began attempting contact for an interview, Peter Madsen was no longer just an eccentric inventor. He had become a predator, calculating his next move. And Kim Wall, with her professional persistence and willingness to dive deep into stories, had inadvertently become the perfect target. For months, Peter kept Kim in suspense, replying to her emails irregularly. It wasn't indifference, it was preparation. He was deciding whether Kim would be his victim and planning exactly how to execute it without getting caught. On the morning of August 10, 2017, Peter Madsen finally sent the message Kim had been waiting for. What she didn't know was that for Peter, that message was not an invitation to an interview. It was a carefully laid trap by a man who had spent years fantasizing about the perfect crime at the bottom of the sea. The morning of August 10, 2017, dawned sunny in Copenhagen. It was one of those Scandinavian summer days Danes wait for all year. Blue skies, pleasant temperatures, and a gentle breeze from the Baltic Sea. For Kim Wall and Ola Støbe, it should have been just another day of preparing for their move to China and the farewell party planned for that evening. Kim woke up early, as was her routine. She followed a structured morning, strong coffee, reading international news, and checking emails, a discipline honed over years of reporting around the world. That morning, she was particularly excited. In less than a week, she and Ole would be in Beijing, starting a new chapter of their lives. Around 10 a.m., Kim's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Peter Madsen. After months of attempts, the inventor was finally ready for an interview. He also proposed something extra, a chance to see the submarine from the inside and take a short trip on the waters of Copenhagen while they talked. Kim read the message twice. It was exactly the kind of experience that would make her report special. How many journalists could say they had interviewed someone inside an operational submarine? She quickly replied, showing interest but noting that she only had a few hours available due to the farewell party. Madsen responded promptly. It would be perfect, he said. Just a few hours, leaving around 7 p.m. and returning before 10 p.m. Enough time for Kim to do the interview, experience the submarine, and still make it to her party. What Kim didn't know was that this was not an improvised proposal from Madsen. He had sent similar invitations to 3 other women that same day. Kim was the only one who accepted, a fact investigators would later find crucial in establishing premeditation. Kim spent the day finishing preparations for the party and organizing the last details for the move to China. Around 5 p.m., she began getting ready to meet Madsen, choosing practical yet stylish clothing, an orange jacket, a black and white skirt, and comfortable shoes. She tied her hair in a high bun, a style that made her feel professional and confident. Before leaving, Kim talked to Ole about the submarine trip. He asked if she wanted him to come along, but Kim preferred to go alone. It would be easier to conduct the interview without distractions. Ole agreed, but asked her to be careful and not be too late for the party. They said goodbye with a long kiss, the last they would share. Kim arrived at Refshalein Harbor around 6:30 p.m. The area, a former shipyard, had been transformed into a cultural and residential district. She knew it well, as it was close to where she lived with Ole. The UC-3 Nautilus was docked at one of the piers, and Kim was impressed by its size. Peter Madsen greeted her with a broad smile and apparent enthusiasm. He seemed in good spirits, talking animatedly about the submarine and his space projects. For Kim, used to difficult sources and wary people, Madsen's welcoming demeanor was a relief. Around 7 p.m., a distant camera captured an image that would become iconic. Kim and Peter on the UC-3 Nautilus's tower, preparing to submerge. Kim, in her bright orange jacket, looked toward the horizon with professional curiosity. Peter stood beside her, wearing an expression later described by investigators as predatory. The photo, taken by someone at the harbor, was posted on social media with a casual caption about the submarine going for a ride. No one could imagine it was documenting Kim Wall's final moments alive. At 7:15 p.m., the UC-3 Nautilus began slowly moving away from the harbor. Kim must have been fascinated by the experience. She loved adventure and new experiences. The submarine headed south toward the Øresund Strait, separating Denmark from Sweden. During the next 2 hours, what happened inside the UC-3 Nautilus would remain a mystery for months. But one thing was certain. Madsen had a plan that he had been preparing for weeks, perhaps months. Meanwhile, in Copenhagen, Ole Støbe was receiving the first guests for the farewell party. He explained that Kim would arrive a bit later, finishing one last important interview. Friends joked about her professional dedication, always putting work first. By 8 p.m., Ole began to feel slightly concerned. Kim had said she would arrive around 10 p.m., but he expected at least a message updating her timing. He tried calling, but her phone went straight to voicemail. This was not unusual when Kim was working, so he decided to wait. By 9 p.m., Ole's concern grew. He sent several text messages, but received no reply. Party guests noticed his anxiety, though he tried to remain calm. Perhaps the interview was going well and Kim had lost track of time. By 10:30 p.m., Ole could no longer hide his worry. Kim would never be this late to her own farewell party without notifying anyone. He began calling repeatedly, but the phone continued going to voicemail. Something was wrong. What Ole didn't know was that at that very moment, Peter Madsen was sending a text to his ex-wife. The message, sent at 11:25 p.m., read, "I'm on a little adventure with the Nautilus and I'm fine. Sailing under the moonlight, not diving. Hugs to the cats." Later, when questioned about the message, Madsen claimed he wanted to reassure his ex-wife, who would worry if she knew he was on an unplanned outing. Investigators would interpret it differently. It was a message sent shortly after committing a heinous act, intended to establish an alibi. At 1:43 a.m. on August 11th, Ole Støbe finally made the call that would save the investigation. He contacted the police. His girlfriend had disappeared during a journalistic interview on a submarine, and he was extremely worried. The Danish police took the case seriously immediately. Disappearances on vessels are always treated as emergencies, especially in international waters, such as the Øresund Strait. They launched a search and rescue operation involving the Danish Navy, the Swedish Coast Guard, and multiple emergency agencies. Throughout the night, Ole stayed awake, pacing nervously through the apartment he shared with Kim, repeatedly checking his phone for news. Party guests had long gone, leaving him alone with his growing anxiety. In those dark hours before dawn, Ole still held on to hope. Perhaps there had been a mechanical issue with the submarine. Perhaps they were stuck somewhere waiting for help. Perhaps Kim was safe but unreachable. He could not imagine that at that very moment, Kim Wall had already been lost and that her fate inside the UC-3 Nautilus was the beginning of one of Denmark's most complex criminal investigations. The 2 hours that were supposed to last just for an interview had become an eternity for Kim Wall, a nightmare for Ole Støbe, and the start of a criminal investigation that would grip the nation for months.
The dawn of August 11th brought an intense search and rescue operation in the Øresund Strait. Danish Navy ships,
rescue helicopters, and Swedish Coast Guard vessels systematically combed the waters, looking for any sign of the UC-3 Nautilus and its occupants. At 10:30 a.m., a rescue helicopter spotted the submarine in Køge Bay, approximately 40 kilometers south of Copenhagen. The UC-3 Nautilus was on the surface, heading toward the harbor. Pilots established radio contact with the vessel. The voice that answered was calm and controlled. Peter Madsen reported that he was returning to port and that everything was fine. But just 30 minutes later, something extraordinary happened. The submarine began to sink rapidly, as if it had been deliberately flooded. Madsen was seen jumping into the water and swimming toward a private rescue boat nearby. When pulled aboard, wet and apparently in shock, he was questioned about Kim Wall. His response was immediate and firm. He had left her on shore the previous evening, around 10:30 p.m., at the tip of Refshalonen. The Danish police quickly arrived and detained Madsen for questioning. Initially, he was charged with negligent homicide, the assumption being that an accident may have occurred on the submarine and he was trying to cover it up out of fear or panic. During the first interrogation, Madsen maintained his story. He had given an interview to Kim Wall during the submarine trip, everything had gone well, and he had safely dropped her off at 10:30 p.m. He claimed he did not know why she had not contacted her family or friends since then. When asked why the submarine sank, Madsen claimed there had been a technical failure, a problem with the valves that caused uncontrolled flooding. He said he tried to save the vessel but had to abandon it when he realized it was impossible. Investigators immediately began verifying Madsen's story. Dive teams were sent to examine the wreckage of the UC-3 Nautilus, which had sunk to a depth of 7 meters. What they found immediately contradicted Madsen's version of events. Technical analysis revealed that the submarine had been deliberately flooded. The valves showed no signs of mechanical failure. Instead, they had been intentionally opened. This could not have been an accident. Peter Madsen had lied from the very beginning. Confronted with this evidence, Madsen quickly changed his story. In a closed court hearing on August 12th, he presented a completely different account. This time, he admitted that Kim Wall had died on board the submarine, but insisted it had been an accident. According to his new version, Kim had suffered a fatal injury when the heavy 70-kilogram hatch fell on her head. Madsen claimed he lost his balance while trying to hold the hatch open for her, causing it to fall and hit her. Madsen said he panicked when he realized Kim was dead. He did not know what to do, so he decided to bury her at sea, his euphemism for disposing of the body in the water. He still denied dismembering the body, claiming he had thrown it into Køge Bay intact.
Could you tell us what you were doing
This second version immediately raised suspicion. If Kim had died in an accident, why had Madsen lied initially? Why had he deliberately flooded the submarine? And why had he waited almost 12 hours before attempting to return to port? As interrogations continued, search teams combed Køge Bay for Kim Wall's body. It was an extremely difficult search. The currents could have carried a body in any direction, and time was working against the investigators. On August 21st, 10 days after Kim Wall's disappearance, a cyclist made a grim discovery on a beach south of Copenhagen. Partially buried in the sand was a human torso. The cyclist immediately contacted the police. The area was secured, and a team of forensic experts arrived quickly. What they found was disturbing beyond expectations. The torso showed clear signs of deliberate mutilation. Not only had the head been removed, but the arms and legs had been precisely cut. Even more disturbing, the torso showed evidence of multiple stab wounds. An initial analysis revealed at least 15 knife injuries, mainly concentrated in the chest and abdominal region. Clearly, this was not the result of an accident with a hatch. Samples were collected immediately for DNA analysis. On August 23rd, the results confirmed what everyone feared. The torso belonged to Kim Wall. The young Swedish journalist was dead, and the evidence strongly suggested she had been the victim of a violent crime. When confronted with the discovery of the mutilated torso, Peter Madsen was forced to change his story again. He could no longer claim that Kim had died in a simple hatch accident. The 15 stab wounds made it clear that something far more sinister had occurred. On September 5th, during a Danish court hearing, Madsen presented his third version of events. This time, he claimed Kim had died from accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. According to this new story, toxic gases from the submarine's exhaust system had leaked into the compartment where Kim was, killing her while Madsen was on the upper deck. Madsen admitted to dismembering the body, but claimed he did so only to remove it from the submarine. He said he panicked upon finding Kim dead and did not know how to explain the accident, so he decided to cut the body into smaller pieces to dispose it in the sea. This third version was even less plausible than the previous ones. Submarine experts confirmed that if there had been a significant carbon monoxide leak, as Madsen described, there would have been clear physical evidence: soot in filters, system damage, and signs of overheating. None of this was found. Furthermore, when Kim's lungs were later examined, no traces of carbon monoxide were found. If she had died from gas poisoning, as Madsen claimed, there would have been conclusive toxicological evidence. As Madsen continued changing his story, investigators were uncovering evidence that painted a much darker picture. On October 4th, during a search of Madsen's apartment and workshop, they made a discovery that would change the nature of the investigation completely. On Madsen's personal computer, investigators found a disturbing digital file. More than 40 videos showing women being harmed. These were not fictional films, but recordings of real extreme violence. The collection revealed Madsen's violent fantasies. He had spent years consuming content depicting extreme suffering. Investigators realized that Kim Wall was not the victim of an accident or a crime of passion. She had been targeted by someone who had long planned to turn his obsessions into reality. On October 7th, police divers made another grim discovery in Koj Bay. 2 heavy plastic bags containing metal objects were found on the seabed. Inside the bags were Kim Wall's head, her 2 legs, her clothing, and a knife that had been used in dismemberment. The discovery of the head allowed for more detailed forensic analysis. Contrary to Madsen's claim that Kim had died from a hatch injury, the head showed no signs of fractures or significant external injuries. There was no physical evidence supporting any of the 3 versions Madsen had told. On November 22nd, Kim's right arm was found by divers. A week later, on November 29th, the left arm was recovered. With each new discovery, it became clear that Peter Madsen had carried out meticulous and calculated dismemberment. The full autopsy, conducted by forensic physician Christina Jacobsen at Copenhagen's Institute of Forensic Medicine, revealed horrific details about Kim Wall's final moments. In addition to the 15 stab wounds on the torso, there were 14 injuries to the genital area, both internal and external, inflicted while she was still alive. Forensic analysis indicated Kim had been subjected to prolonged sexual assault before her death. The genital injuries were consistent with the use of sharp objects, exactly the type of tools found in Madsen's submarine. On October 30th, 2017, confronted with the growing weight of physical evidence, Peter Madsen finally admitted to dismembering Kim Wall. Yet, he still refused to confess to murder, maintaining that she had died accidentally from carbon monoxide poisoning. Investigators understood that Madsen was desperately trying to avoid a premeditated murder charge. He was willing to admit that dismemberment, a crime in itself, but not the intentional homicide, which carried a far harsher sentence. Meanwhile, the Danish public was in shock. The rocket Madsen they had admired for years had been revealed as a violent criminal. His transformation from eccentric inventor to predator was one of the most dramatic falls of grace in modern Danish history. With each lie exposed and each piece of evidence uncovered, it became clear that Kim Wall had not died in an accident, but had been the victim of a carefully planned and executed crime. Peter Madsen's lies were unraveling, but the worst was yet to come.
As Peter Madsen continued changing his versions of events, Danish police investigators were uncovering the true extent of the depravity behind the crime. Forensic analysis of Madsen's personal computer revealed a dark world of violent fantasies he had cultivated for years. The Danish Digital Crimes Team, led by some of the country's top forensic specialists, began a meticulous examination of all electronic devices found in Madsen's apartment and workshop. What they discovered exceeded their worst expectations. Madsen's main computer contained a digital library of horror he had amassed over several years. More than 40 videos of extreme violence against women were stored in carefully organized folders. These were not commercial horror or fictional films. They were real recordings of women being harmed and killed. The collection included so-called snuff films, recordings of real killings made for the pleasure of sadistic viewers. There were videos showing women being impaled, strangled, decapitated, and subjected to extreme abuse. Some of the videos appeared to have been filmed in war zones or by terrorist organizations. What disturbed investigators most was not just the existence of this collection, but the way it was organized. Madsen had cataloged the videos by type of violence, duration, and apparently by personal preference. It was clear he did not just consume this content occasionally, he studied it. In addition to the videos, investigators found thousands of images depicting sexualized violence. Photographs showed women in extreme vulnerability, images of torture, and material documenting violent, non-consensual acts. It was a collection obsessively built over years. Perhaps even more revealing were Madsen's personal writings found on the computer. He maintained a blog where he openly fantasized about violence against women. Posts dated weeks before Kim Wall's death detailed homicidal desires. In a post titled Himmel og Helvede, which he described as an entry into my mind, Madsen wrote, "If you feel anger toward your boss, stab her in the back. Why hesitate? She won't be missed. Surrender to your rage. Use your knife." Another post, written just 2 weeks before the murder, contained detailed fantasies about abducting women on his submarine. Madsen described scenarios in which he would lure women onto the UC-3 Nautilus under a pretense of interviews or tours, and then hold them captive to satisfy his violent fantasies. Investigators also discovered text messages Madsen had sent to multiple women in the months leading up to the crime. To a friend, identified only as Sarah, name changed for protection, Madsen had sent playful messages about tying her up on the submarine and harming her. In one particularly disturbing conversation, Madsen wrote to Sarah, "I have a murder plan ready," and "You should be tied up on the Nautilus." When questioned by police later, Sarah admitted she felt uncomfortable with these messages, but interpreted them as dark humor from an eccentric man. What made these messages even more sinister was that Madsen had invited Sarah for a submarine ride on the same day, August 10th, as Kim Wall. Sarah was one of 4 women Madsen invited that day. Kim was the only one who accepted.
Investigators realized this proved premeditation. Madsen was not specifically targeting Kim Wall. He was looking for any woman who would agree to board his submarine that day. Kim happened to be the one who said yes. Analysis of Madsen's internet activity revealed a disturbing pattern of searches. In the weeks leading up to the murder, he had extensively researched methods of dismemberment, how to dispose of evidence in maritime environments, and torture techniques. His searches showed meticulous planning. A particularly shocking find was a search about how long a person can survive torture. Search terms included phrases like maximum pain without death, how long to bleed out, and how to keep a victim conscious during torture. Investigators also found evidence that Madsen had researched Kim Wall's professional schedule. He had visited her online portfolio multiple times, read her articles, and even investigated her relationship with Ulla Stoba. It was clear that he had studied his next victim. In the workshop where Madsen carried out his projects, investigators made physical discoveries that corroborated the digital evidence. A saw that had been photographed at the location just days before the crime was missing. Occasional collaborators confirmed that several sharp tools had also disappeared. Particularly disturbing was the discovery of traces of blood on multiple surfaces despite Madsen's obvious attempts to clean the area. DNA testing later confirmed that at least some of these traces belonged to Kim Wall, suggesting that part of the assault or dismemberment may have occurred in the workshop before the body was disposed of in the sea. Investigators also found that Madsen had purchased unusual supplies in the weeks before the crime. Receipts showed purchases of heavy-duty plastic bags, metal weights, and industrial cleaning products. To investigators, it was clear these were intended for evidence disposal. Analysis of Madsen's phone records revealed another sinister aspect of his planning. He had researched tidal patterns in Kuja Bay, currents, and the best locations to discard objects at sea without detection. This level of preparation demonstrated clear premeditation. Perhaps the most disturbing evidence found on Madsen's computer were drafts of messages he had prepared to send after the crime. These included messages for his ex-wife, friends, and even the media, all designed to establish alibis and divert suspicion. One unsent message, dated August 10th, read, "Submarine ride canceled due to technical problems. Journalists decided not to wait for repair." It was clear that Madsen had planned to use this message if his initial lies failed. Investigators also found evidence that Madsen had studied similar criminal cases, apparently learning how other perpetrators were caught and trying to avoid their mistakes. He had extensively researched modern forensic techniques, particularly DNA analysis and digital crime reconstruction. Ironically, all this knowledge Madsen had acquired about criminal investigations worked against him. His awareness of forensic methods led him to take precautions that actually provided more evidence of premeditation. Each attempt to cover up the crime became further proof of his guilt. The complete analysis of Madsen's electronic devices took several weeks, but ultimately painted an unmistakable portrait of a sexual predator who had spent years fantasizing about extreme violence against women and had finally decided to turn his fantasies into reality.
Hell no.
To investigators, it was clear that Kim Wall had not merely been unlucky to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had been deliberately lured into a trap by a man who had spent months, perhaps years, planning the perfect crime. The laboratory of horror on Madsen's computer was definitive proof that Kim Wall's murder was an act of pure premeditated evil.
When Danish investigators began analyzing the evidence in Kim Wall's murder, they knew they were facing one of the most complex cases in modern criminal history in the country. Peter Madsen had attempted what he believed would be the perfect crime, a murder at sea, with the body dismembered and discarded where it would never be found. But he had gravely underestimated the power of 21st century forensic science. Kim Wall's autopsy was conducted by Dr. Christina Jacobsen, one of Denmark's most experienced forensic pathologists at the Copenhagen Institute of Forensic Medicine.
what she discovered was one of the most brutal cases of her 20-year career. Kim's torso, found on August 21, had spent 10 days in the salty waters of the Baltic Sea. Prolonged exposure had caused significant decomposition, complicating forensic analysis. However, the cold water had preserved crucial evidence that allowed Dr. Jacobson to reconstruct the events of Kim's final moments. The analysis revealed 15 stab wounds on the torso, mainly concentrated in the chest and abdomen. But it was the discovery of injuries to the genital area that revealed the truly sadistic nature of the crime. Kim had suffered 14 internal and external injuries to her genitalia, all inflicted while she was still alive. We believe the genital injuries were inflicted close to the time of death, Dr. Jacobson told the court. Microscopic examination of the tissue showed bleeding patterns that only occur in living victims. Kim Wall had been sexually tortured before being killed. The genital injuries were consistent with the use of sharp objects such as screwdrivers and nails, the exact type of tools found on Madsen's submarine. Metallurgical analysis of microscopic fragments found in the wounds confirmed that at least some were caused by common steel tools, not medical instruments. The exact cause of death remained a mystery for months. Kim's head had spent weeks in the water before recovery, and decomposition made it impossible to determine whether she had died from strangulation, suffocation, or blood loss from her injuries. However, examination of the lungs provided crucial clues. There were signs of mechanical asphyxiation, evidence that Kim had struggled desperately for air in her final moments. This directly contradicted Madsen's claim that she had died peacefully from carbon monoxide poisoning. To test Madsen's gas poisoning claim, investigators subjected the UC-3 Nautilus to detailed technical analysis. Maritime engineering experts examined all exhaust, ventilation, and propulsion systems of the submarine. If a significant carbon monoxide leak had occurred as Madsen alleged, there would have been unmistakable physical evidence: soot in the air filters, overheating damage in the exhaust systems, and chemical residues in the internal compartments. None of these were found. Peter Winter from the Danish Technical Institute testified that while it was technically plausible for a gas leak to occur in a submarine of Madsen's design, there was absolutely no physical evidence that it had happened in the UC-3 Nautilus. Toxicological analysis of Kim's lung tissue was definitive. There were no traces of carbon monoxide in her system. If she had died from gas poisoning, as Madsen claimed, there would have been conclusive chemical evidence. The complete absence of toxins in her lungs proved this was another lie. While the autopsy revealed the physical horrors Kim had endured, DNA analysis provided crucial evidence directly linking Peter Madsen to the crime. The Danish forensic lab, equipped with state-of-the-art genetic technology, processed hundreds of samples collected from the crime scene, the submarine, and Kim's remains. Although Madsen's DNA was not found directly on Kim's body, possibly due to decomposition in the salt water, investigators found equally conclusive biological evidence. Traces of semen were identified on the underwear Madsen was wearing when arrested. When confronted with this evidence at trial, Madsen denied ejaculating in Kim's presence. But for investigators, the presence of seminal fluid in his clothing immediately after the crime was clear evidence of sexual arousal during the violent events. Digital forensic analysis was equally revealing. The Danish cybercrime team used advanced data recovery software to reconstruct Madsen's online activity in the days before and after the murder. File metadata on his computer showed that Madsen had accessed his collection of violent videos on the morning of April 10th, just hours before encountering Kim. He had specifically watched videos showing women being tortured with sharp objects, a pattern that mirrored exactly what he would later do to Kim that day. Analysis of Madsen's text messages provided a precise timeline of events. His text to his ex-wife, sent at 11:25 p.m., was particularly revealing. Investigators determined it had been sent approximately 20 minutes after Kim's death, enough time for Madsen to complete the initial dismemberment and begin disposing of evidence. Forensic reconstruction of the events was aided by relatively new technology, digital blood pattern analysis. Using specialized software, investigators determined Kim's approximate positions during the attacks based on blood spatter patterns inside the submarine. The analysis revealed that Kim had been attacked in multiple positions within the submarine compartment, suggesting she had desperately tried to escape her attacker. Blood patterns on the ceiling indicated she was attacked while standing. Blood patterns on the walls suggested she had fallen, and blood patterns on the floor showed where she finally succumbed to her injuries. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source: footage filmed by Emma Sullivan. Sullivan, an Australian documentarian, had been filming Madsen and his team for almost a year as part of a documentary on his space projects. Sullivan's footage captured Madsen in unguarded moments, revealing aspects of his personality he usually hid from the public. In a particularly shocking interview, filmed weeks before the murder, Madsen casually described himself as a psychopath and called himself a human predator. Even more disturbing, the footage showed Madsen handling some of the same tools later used in the crime. A saw, clearly visible in Sullivan's footage, was missing the day after the murder, evidence that helped prove premeditation. Forensic analysis also benefited from advances in material analysis technology. Electron microscopy was used to examine microscopic metal fragments found in Kim's wounds, allowing investigators to identify exactly which types of tools had been used. Mass spectrometry analyzed chemical residues found on the submarine, revealing that Madsen had attempted to clean evidence using specific industrial cleaning products he had purchased weeks before the crime. Three-dimensional digital reconstruction of the crime scene allowed investigators to create an accurate virtual representation of events. Using GPS data, current patterns, and decomposition models, they determined not only where Kim had died, but also the exact route Madsen had taken to dispose of body parts. Perhaps the most impressive technology used in the investigation was forensic communications analysis. Experts recovered text messages Madsen thought he had deleted, including drafts prepared for sending after the crime as part of his cover-up strategy. Cell tower analysis provided a precise timeline of Madsen's movements on the night of the crime. The data showed the UC-3 Nautilus had remained stationary in a specific location in Coge Bay for several hours, exactly the time required to torture, kill, and dismember a victim. When all of these technological threads were combined, they formed an irrefutable scientific picture of Peter Madsen's guilt. Every lie he told was exposed by forensic evidence. Every attempt to conceal the crime was revealed by modern science. The investigation of Kim Wall's murder demonstrated how the combination of traditional forensic techniques and advanced digital technologies can solve even the most carefully planned crimes. Peter Madsen had attempted the perfect murder, but 21st century forensic science proved that no such thing exists.
On March 8, 2018, Peter Madsen entered the Copenhagen City Court to face a trial that would become one of the most closely followed in Danish criminal history. At 47 years old, the man once celebrated as a visionary inventor was now being prosecuted for premeditated murder, sexual assault, and desecration of a corpse. Madsen's decision to be tried by a judge and only 2 jurors, rather than a traditional jury of 6 or 9, was seen by many as a strategic attempt to avoid popular emotion that could influence a larger jury. His lawyer, Bettina Hald Engmark,
argued that the intense media coverage made a full jury trial impossible. The Danish prosecution, led by prosecutor Jacob Buch Jepsen, had prepared a case they believed to be irrefutable. They had physical, digital, forensic, and circumstantial evidence that painted a devastating picture of premeditation and extreme cruelty. Buch Jepsen opened the case dramatically, but factually. This was not a crime of passion, nor an accident that got out of control. It was the carefully executed realization of the darkest fantasies of a sexual predator who spent years preparing for this moment. The prosecution's strategy was methodical. They began by establishing the timeline of events, using GPS data, communication records, and witnesses to show exactly how Kim Wall had been lured to her death. The last photo of Kim and Peter in the submarine tower was presented as evidence, a frozen moment in time before the horror began. The prosecutor then presented digital evidence found on Madsen's computer. The courtroom fell into disturbed silence as Buch Jepsen described a collection of more than 40 videos of extreme violence against women. While the videos themselves were not shown due to graphic content, their descriptions were enough to convey the depravity of Madsen's obsessions. These videos were not morbid curiosity or extreme entertainment. They were study material for a man planning to turn these fantasies into reality. Text messages Madsen had sent to other women were read aloud. The message to Sarah about having a murder plan ready and about tying her up in the submarine caused a stir in the gallery. It became clear that Kim Wall had not been specifically targeted. She was merely the first woman willing to enter Madsen's trap. Dr. Christina Jakobsen, the forensic pathologist, presented her findings with cold scientific precision. She described the 15 stab wounds on Kim's torso, and even more disturbingly, the 14 genital injuries inflicted while Kim was still alive. Based on the analysis of bleeding patterns and the nature of the injuries, Dr. Jakobsen testified, the victim was subjected to prolonged sexual torture before death. These injuries were deliberately inflicted to maximize pain and suffering. When asked by the defense whether she was absolutely certain of the cause of death, Dr. Jakobsen admitted that decomposition in the sea had made it impossible to determine whether Kim had died from strangulation, suffocation, or blood loss. This admission would become central to the defense strategy. Defense attorney Bettina Hald-Jengmark faced an impossible task. With the weight of evidence against her client, her only viable strategy was to create enough doubt to avoid a conviction for premeditated murder. If she could convince the court that Kim's death had been accidental, even if followed by dismemberment, Madsen would face a much lighter sentence. Engmark relentlessly focused on the prosecution's inability to determine the exact cause of Kim's death. She argued that it is not my client's duty to prove he is innocent. It is the prosecution's job to prove guilt, and the prosecution's details are not based on facts. The defense called Kim Winter, an expert from the Danish Technical Institute, to testify that Madsen's account of a carbon monoxide accident was technically plausible. Winter confirmed that while unlikely, such an accident could theoretically occur in the type of submarine Madsen had built. Engmark also questioned why, if the crime had been premeditated as the prosecution claimed, no traces of Madsen's DNA were found directly on Kim's body. She suggested that the absence of direct DNA evidence supported her client's accident version. But the defense strategy began to crumble when Peter Madsen took the witness stand. During 3 days of questioning, Madsen displayed a coldness and arrogance that shocked even experienced courtroom observers.
When asked about dismembering Kim Wall, Madsen reportedly smiled sickly and said, "I don't see how that mattered at that moment, since she was dead." His complete lack of empathy or remorse was evident to everyone in the courtroom. Madsen admitted to sleeping beside Kim's dead body for 2 hours before beginning dismemberment. When asked why he hadn't sought medical help when allegedly finding Kim unconscious, he failed to provide a convincing explanation. Even more damaging was when Book Jepsen asked if the violent videos on his computer had inspired him to kill Kim Wall. Madsen responded sarcastically, "No, but I worry about you for asking that question." His arrogance in court was palpable and certainly did not help him with the judge or jurors. During cross-examination, Madsen attempted to explain the text message sent to his ex-wife at 11:25 p.m. on the night of the crime. He claimed he worried she would be nervous if she knew he was on an unplanned adventure in the submarine. But when pressed on why he sent that specific message only 20 minutes after allegedly finding Kim dead, his answers became evasive and contradictory. A particularly devastating moment came when the prosecution presented evidence that Madsen had invited 4 different women for submarine rides on August 10th. Kim was the only one who accepted. This fact destroyed any notion that the crime was unplanned or specific to Kim Wall. If this was really an accident, as the defendant claims, Book Jepsen argued, why did he invite multiple women on the same fatal ride? This proves beyond any doubt that Peter Madsen was hunting a victim that day. The prosecution also presented evidence of Madsen's online searches in the weeks before the crime. His queries about methods of torture, dismemberment, and disposing of evidence painted a picture of careful planning that could not be explained as preparation for an accident. One of the most impactful witnesses was Dorth Damsgaard, a former adult film actress who had known Madsen for 9 years. She testified that Madsen had repeatedly invited her on submarine rides, but she always refused due to a bad feeling about him. "He repeatedly invited me to sail in his submarine, but I thanked him and said no each time. The last time he asked was about 14 days before everything happened," Damsgaard testified. "I had a bad feeling about it. I feared he might do something out there to scare me." Damsgaard revealed that Madsen never hid his violent sexual fantasies from her, speaking openly about desires for domination and control. Her decision not to accept his invitations may have saved her life. Emma Sullivan, the Australian documentarian who had filmed Madsen for almost a year, provided some of the most damaging evidence. Her footage showed Madsen in unguarded moments, revealing aspects of his personality he tried to hide from the public. The most disturbing footage showed Madsen casually speaking about being a psychopath and calling himself a human predator. When these words were played in the courtroom, several people in the gallery could be seen shaking their heads in disbelief. Sullivan also testified about changes she'd noticed in Madsen's behavior in the weeks before the crime. He had become more reserved, more aggressive, and had begun making strange comments about finishing projects and implementing plans. Madsen's psychiatric evaluation was presented by Dr. Niels Sestoft, one of Denmark's most respected forensic psychiatrists. After months of assessment, Sestoft concluded that Madsen was severely aberrant and showed significant psychopathic traits, but remained legally sane. "The defendant has a clear understanding of right and wrong," Sestoft testified. "He knew his actions were illegal and immoral, but chose to proceed anyway. This is consistent with antisocial personality disorder with psychopathic features." The psychiatric evaluation revealed that Madsen showed no genuine remorse for what he did to Kim Wall. His expressions of regret appeared calculated to impress the court, not genuine expressions of guilt or repentance. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the defense was losing ground. Every attempt by Engmark to create reasonable doubt was countered by solid scientific evidence. The mountain of physical, digital, and behavioral evidence was simply overwhelming. In his closing argument, Book Jepsen summarized the case against Madsen devastatingly. "This man spent years fantasizing about torturing and killing women. He collected videos of extreme violence, wrote about his homicidal desires, and then carefully executed a plan to lure a victim into his trap. Kim Wall did not die in an accident. She was murdered to satisfy Peter Madsen's darkest sadistic fantasies." The prosecution requested life imprisonment, arguing that Madsen represented an ongoing danger to society and that the premeditated and sadistic nature of his crime justified the maximum sentence. Engmark made a final desperate appeal in her closing, focusing on the uncertainty over Kim's exact cause of death. Doubts remain about how exactly Kim Wall died. In the presence of doubt, you must favor the defendant. A man should not spend the rest of his life in prison based on speculation, no matter how convincing it may seem. But her argument rang hollow against the weight of the evidence. Judge Annette Burko and the two jurors retired to deliberate on April 24, 2018. Their deliberations lasted less than 24 hours. On April 25, 2018, the courtroom was packed as Burko read the verdict. Peter Madsen was found guilty of all three major charges: premeditated murder, aggravated sexual assault, and desecration of a corpse. The court was unanimous in reaching this verdict, Burko declared. There is clear evidence that the defendant demonstrated an interest in killing and dismembering people. The evidence shows beyond any reasonable doubt that Kim Wall was deliberately tortured and murdered. Madsen was sentenced to life imprisonment, the maximum possible under Danish law. The court also ordered him to pay 200,000 Danish kroner, about $32,000 in compensation to Ole Staba, and ordered the UC-3 Nautilus submarine destroyed. When the verdict was read, Madsen remained impassive, displaying the same emotional coldness he had shown throughout the trial. No tears, no emotion, just the cold acceptance of a man who had gambled on deceiving the justice system and lost. For Kim Wall's family and Ole Staba, the verdict brought a sense of justice, but not closure. No sentence could bring Kim back or erase the trauma she suffered in her final moments. But at least the man who had taken her life so brutally would never again be free to harm another.
Peter Madsen's life sentence was supposed to mark the end of the story, but the inventor who once dreamed of conquering space was not ready to silently accept his terrestrial fate. In the years following the trial, Madsen continued to shock Denmark with his actions, culminating in a confession that would finally reveal the full truth about Kim Wall's murder. Madsen was initially incarcerated at Herstedvester State Prison, a maximum security facility on the outskirts of Copenhagen, specializing in prisoners considered particularly dangerous. His cell was located in the isolation wing, both for his own protection and to protect other inmates from his potentially dangerous influence. From the start, Madsen was a problematic prisoner. He refused to accept guard authority, constantly challenged prison rules, and maintained his characteristic arrogance in all interactions. Prison reports described him as manipulative and always seeking ways to circumvent imposed restrictions. Despite being in prison, Madsen managed to attract a peculiar group of admirers. Women from around the world began writing to him, some expressing sympathy for his situation, others seemingly drawn by the notoriety of his crime. For prison psychologists, this was a disturbing but not uncommon phenomenon. Some individuals are attracted to famous violent criminals. One such correspondent was Jenny Kirpin, a 39-year-old Russian-Mauritian political activist who had received political asylum in Finland due to persecution in Russia. Kirpin began corresponding with Madsen in 2018 and gradually developed what she would later describe as romantic feelings for the convicted killer. On December 19, 2019, in a small and surreal ceremony at Herstedvester Prison, Peter Madsen married Jenny Kirpin. The ceremony was officiated by a civil officer and witnessed by only a few prison staff. For many observers, including Kim Wall's parents, the wedding was an additional affront to the memory of their daughter. Madsen's prison marriage sparked significant controversy in Denmark. Many questioned whether it was appropriate to allow a convicted murderer to celebrate joyful occasions while his victim would never have the chance to do so. However, the Danish prison system maintains certain provisions for basic human rights, including the right to marriage. But it was on October 20, 2020, that Madsen truly shocked the nation again.
On that day, during what was supposed to be a routine prison activity, Madsen executed an elaborate escape attempt that revealed even more about his disturbed personality. Using a fake gun built from improvised materials and a fake bomb strapped to his chest, Madsen managed to intimidate guards and leave the prison gates. He was found about 1.5 kilometers from the prison, sitting calmly in a field waiting to be recaptured. The escape attempt was clearly theatrical. Madsen made no serious effort to flee, but seemed more interested in creating a public spectacle. Psychologists interpreted this as a manifestation of his ongoing need for attention and control even behind bars. The incident resulted in even stricter security measures for Madsen. He was transferred to tighter isolation and lost many of the limited privileges he had previously maintained. More importantly, the incident renewed public attention to the case, setting the stage for what would be his most significant revelation. In September 2020, a Danish documentary aired featuring an exclusive interview with Peter Madsen in prison. For decades, Madsen had maintained his version that Kim Wall had died accidentally, even after his conviction. But in this interview, confronted directly by a journalist about his guilt, Madsen finally revealed the truth. When directly asked if he had killed Kim Wall, Peter Madsen looked straight into the camera and said, "There is only one culprit, and it is me." This simple but devastating confession was the first time Madsen had publicly admitted responsibility for the murder. For more than 3 years, he had maintained the fiction that Kim had died accidentally, forcing her family to relive the trauma time and again whenever he changed his story. The confession brought a sense of closure to many who had followed the case, including Ole Stab and Kim Wall's parents, Joachim and Ingrid. While the confession could not undo the harm that had been done, it at least provided final confirmation that justice had been served. Subsequent documentaries revealed more disturbing details about Madsen's personality. Emma Sullivan, the documentarian who had filmed Madsen before the crime, revealed additional footage showing even clearer signs of his predatory nature. The footage showed Madsen casually discussing violence, demonstrating tools in ways that now seemed sinister, and making comments about women that, in retrospect, were clearly threatening. Sullivan admitted feeling guilty for not recognizing the warning signs at the time. The Kim Wall case continued to resonate in Scandinavian and international popular culture. Beyond Sullivan's original documentary, Into the Deep, the Submarine murder case, several other productions were created exploring different aspects of the crime. The Danish TV series, The Investigation, Efterskorging, created by Tobias Lindholm, took a unique approach by focusing entirely on the police investigation and the impact on Kim's family, never showing Madsen or giving him additional attention. The series was praised for its respectful approach, keeping Kim Wall at the center of the narrative. HBO produced The Disappearance of Kim Wall, Submarine, a 2-part documentary directed by Aaron Lee Carr that examined both the crime and Kim's journalistic legacy. This production was particularly effective in humanizing Kim, portraying her as the talented and courageous journalist she had been, not just a victim. Kim Wall's legacy extends far beyond the tragedy of her death. In her memory, the Kim Wall Memorial Fund was established, providing scholarships for young female journalists who wish to cover stories in dangerous or underreported areas. The fund ensures that Kim's adventurous spirit and journalistic courage continue to inspire future generations. The Kim Wall Award for International Reporting was established by the International Women's Media Foundation to honor exceptional reporting by female journalists in high-risk situations. The award recognizes the type of brave and essential journalism Kim practiced. Several journalism schools, including her alma mater, Columbia University, established programs and scholarships in Kim's memory. These programs emphasize the importance of rigorous investigative journalism and international reporting, values Kim exemplified perfectly. Ole Stab, who had lost not only his partner, but also their shared plans for the future, gradually rebuilt his life. He became a respected advocate for victims' rights, and worked to improve support available for families affected by similar tragedies. Kim Wall's parents, Joachim and Ingrid, also became advocates for reforms in the criminal justice system. They worked to improve protections for victims' families during lengthy trials and ensure that media coverage of criminal cases was responsible, focusing on the victims rather than glorifying perpetrators. For Denmark as a nation, the Kim Wall case represented a loss of innocence. The country had prided itself on low violent crime rates and an apparently safe, civilized society. That such brutality could emerge from within its own culture was deeply traumatic for many Danes. The case also led to significant changes in maritime safety protocols. New regulations were implemented for private vessels, especially those used for commercial or tourist purposes. The Submarine case, as it became known, permanently changed how Danes think about personal safety. More than 7 years after the crime, Peter Madsen remains incarcerated at Herstedvester prison. He lost an appeal of his life sentence and, under Danish law, will not be eligible for parole review for at least 12 years. Given the nature of his crime and his continued lack of genuine remorse, release is highly unlikely. Madsen continues to attract attention from disturbed admirers worldwide, a grim reminder of how some individuals are drawn to violence and notoriety. His escape attempt and subsequent prison behavior suggest he still seeks control and attention, even in confinement. But perhaps the most important aspect of this case's legacy is how it demonstrated the power of modern forensic science to ensure justice. Peter Madsen believed he had committed the perfect crime, that isolation at sea and evidence destruction would shield him from consequences. Instead, the combination of DNA analysis, digital forensics, communication reconstruction, advanced pathology, and careful traditional investigation exposed every one of his lies. The case set important precedents for how complex crimes can be solved using modern technology. For Kim Wall, whose dream was to tell important stories about overlooked people and places, there is a bitter irony that her own story became one of the most widely told of modern times. But through documentaries, books, awards, and scholarships established in her memory, Kim Wall achieved a form of immortality her killer could never attain.
Her courage, talent, and dedication to journalism continue to inspire others long after the circumstances of her death have become only a footnote in history. Perhaps this is the true final verdict of the Kim Wall case, that even in the darkest circumstances, the light of a life well lived can continue to shine for decades. The murder of Kim Wall by Peter Madsen marked a turning point in modern criminal history, not only for the brutality of the crime, but also for the way it demonstrated the transformative power of forensic technology in the pursuit of justice. When Madsen believed he had committed the perfect crime in the depths of the Baltic Sea, he gravely underestimated the capacity of 21st century science to uncover even the most closely guarded secrets. The investigation that followed Kim Wall's disappearance became a paradigmatic example of how multiple forensic technologies can work together to reconstruct the truth. DNA analysis, digital forensics, communication reconstruction, advanced pathology, digital blood pattern analysis, and even documentary footage converged to form an irrefutable picture of Madsen's guilt. Perhaps most remarkable about this case is how it illustrated the evolution of criminal investigation in the digital era. 30 years ago, Madsen might have escaped his crime. Without advanced DNA analysis, digital forensics, the ability to recover deleted communications, and modern crime scene reconstruction techniques, his elaborate lies could have been enough to create reasonable doubt. But in 2017, every lie he told was methodically dismantled by science. Every attempt to conceal evidence only generated more clues for investigators to follow. His belief that the sea would keep his secrets proved fatally naive in the era of modern forensic investigation. The case also highlighted the growing importance of digital evidence in solving crimes.
Madsen's computer not only revealed his violent fantasies and clear premeditation, but also provided a precise timeline of his actions before, during, and after the crime. His online searches, text messages, and even file metadata became silent witnesses against him. This increasing reliance on digital evidence presents both opportunities and challenges for criminal justice systems worldwide. On one hand, it provides investigators with unprecedented tools to reconstruct events and establish culpability. On the other, it raises important questions about privacy, digital rights, and the appropriate limits of state surveillance. The Kim Wall case also demonstrated how international collaboration among law enforcement agencies can be crucial in crimes that cross borders. While the crime occurred in Danish waters, aspects of the investigation involved cooperation with Swedish authorities, and forensic expertise came from multiple countries. Such international collaboration will become increasingly important as criminals become more sophisticated and mobile. For Denmark specifically, the case represented a traumatic loss of innocence. The country had prided itself on low violent crime rates and the perception of being a safe, civilized society. The discovery that such depravity could emerge seemingly from nowhere within its own culture was deeply unsettling for many Danes. The case led to significant changes in maritime safety regulations, emergency response protocols, and media guidelines for covering violent crimes. More importantly, it sparked national conversations about warning signs of predatory behavior and the importance of taking seriously threats that might initially appear as bad jokes. The impact on the journalism profession was equally significant. Kim Wall's murder highlighted the risks journalists, especially women, face even in seemingly safe environments. It prompted crucial discussions about safety protocols for journalists, particularly those working alone with unknown sources. News organizations worldwide implemented new safety guidelines in response to the Kim Wall case. These include requirements for journalists to inform colleagues of their whereabouts when meeting sources, stricter background checks for potentially dangerous sources, and better training in recognizing behavioral warning signs. The technological legacy of the case extends beyond criminal investigation. Techniques used to analyze Madsen's digital evidence were later adapted for other types of investigations, including terrorism, financial fraud, and cybercrime. The case has become a teaching study in police academies and forensic science programs worldwide. Particularly notable was the use of digital blood pattern analysis and three-dimensional crime scene reconstruction. These techniques, relatively new in 2017, have become standard tools in complex homicide investigations. The Kim Wall case helped prove their effectiveness and led to broader adoption. The investigation also demonstrated the value of preserving evidence for long periods. Biological and digital traces that might have been discarded in earlier investigations proved crucial years later. This led many law enforcement agencies to revise their evidence retention policies, keeping materials longer in case new technologies make them relevant. For families of violent crime victims, the case set important precedents regarding rights during lengthy trials and protections against media exploitation. The respectful treatment of the Wall family by Danish media, for the most part, became a model for covering similar tragedies without re-traumatizing survivors. The establishment of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund and related awards created a lasting positive legacy that continues to benefit young journalists worldwide. These programs ensure that Kim's courage and dedication to investigative journalism continue to inspire future generations of reporters. More than 7 years after her death, Kim Wall is remembered not only as a victim of a brutal crime, but as a talented journalist who dedicated her life to telling important stories about overlooked people and places. Her reporting on the effects of nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands, voodoo rituals in Haiti, and life in North Korea continues to be read and cited by other journalists. Peter Madsen, on the other hand, will be remembered only as the man who took this promising life so brutally. His attempt to achieve notoriety through violence proved empty. He became only another case studied in criminology books, a grim reminder of the dangers that predators can pose. The Submarine of Death case, as it became known, serves as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest corners of human nature, the light of science and justice can prevail. The combination of careful traditional investigation with cutting-edge forensic technology proved that no crime is truly perfect in the modern era. For criminal investigators around the world, the Kim Wall case remains an inspiring example of how persistence, international collaboration, and intelligent use of technology can ensure that even the most calculating criminals face justice. It is a testament to the power of science to reveal the truth, and a reminder that in the end, justice will prevail. Most importantly, it is a story of how the memory of a life well lived can transcend the circumstances of its ending. Kim Wall continues to make a difference in the world through the journalists she inspires, the stories that continue to be told in her memory, and the justice achieved through the science she would have admired. This case shows how modern forensic technology can unmask even the most calculating criminals. If you found this investigation fascinating, leave a like, share with your friends, and subscribe for more real crime cases. And in the comments, tell us, which technological aspect of this case impressed you the most? The DNA analysis that connected Madsen to the crime? The digital evidence that revealed years of planning? Or perhaps how multiple technologies worked together to uncover the truth? See you in the next video, where we continue exploring how modern science is revolutionizing the pursuit of justice.